Good Grief: Experiencing Loss by Carol Lee. Forward. The purpose of this book is to widen the scope of our understanding of the nature and experience of grief, and of the ways people cope with or react to it. For while grief, like love, is one of life's most profound experiences, it is also one of its most neglected. Although many of us sense that denying grief can have bad consequences, a description of what it is to allow grief and how this varies and is similar from person to person is difficult to find. The notion seems to be that grief is separate from ordinary life, that it is something we suffer, like an illness, and then leave behind. This is not born out of people's experiences. Neither is the idea that loss or grief is something feeble, and that experiencing it is a sign of weakness. Many, if not most, of the feelings involved in the process of grieving would test the emotional equivalent of an athlete in an Olympic situation. Excuse me, an athlete in Olympic condition. There is often, for example, within individual losses, a concern with moral issues arising out of these emotions. A sense of outrage is embedded in the grieving process, emerging especially with the deaths of children as a need for justice. Our sense of rightness about life is deeply offended when a child dies, and we often seek, in our grieving, to set this straight. Many unexpected things were revealed in the course of interviewing for this book. One woman's wish for her grief not to end, another's fear of a dead father, and another's need to smell a dead lover's clothes. There were many expected things too, like the fact that coping with loss is often more difficult than imagination would ever admit, and therefore all the more important to investigate. I have thought of this book as an investigation, not because I am insensitive to the scores of people who appear within its pages, but the opposite. For my wish is not only to tell the stories, but to find out what they might possibly mean to all of us. If people can go through hell and be standing at a bus stop a month later, or a year later, chatting normally, how do they do it? In essence, this book is concerned with people's journeys. A big part of the traveling we do in and through grief is what I have called the journey from the inside out. How do we negotiate this? How do people manage to cross the huge gulf between the powerful inner feelings which grief produces and an outside world which is impervious to their inner turmoil? How do people make the return journey out into the world again after suffering a tremendous blow? The world does not stop for an individual grief, yet some griefs it can feel from the inside as if it has. How do people start it up again? What helps them in this? What hinders them? There can, in fact, be a hierarchy of grieving, in which the death of a friend, for instance, holds a lowly position, especially in the eyes and balance sheets of employers. If a close friend has died, a sympathetic employer might allow a half day for the funeral. Many would not. As a personnel manager says, with compassionate leave, we watch very carefully what it's for, otherwise people can take terrible liberties. I wouldn't expect to give someone compassionate leave if a friend had died. There is only so much room for grief, it seems. We cannot accept all deaths as our own grieving. We would go mad if we did. Yet all pain is linked. It does not occur in a vacuum, and new pains affect old wounds that we carry. How much loss can we be compassionate about? This book explores many avenues, asking people what grief feels like looking back over their shoulders, at it from a distance of 5, 10, or even 20 years. What did it mean then? Is it still important? Some people spoke of there being links between different griefs, one recalling another. Good grief also poses many questions. What happens to older people when, to quote a woman in her 70s, their contracts are more with the dead than the living? Is there a danger of becoming crazed or going mad through grieving? In this respect, there is something that I call general grief, of which we all carry a little from our childhood losses, such as loss of innocence. There is a way in which all of us carry some grief, even if we have never lost anyone. In the same way as we carry some love, even if we have not loved deeply. So we excuse me. So we carry some general grief, which is part of our humanness and compassion, and which is connected to our personal griefs. There is the obvious example of national or communal grief, which many of us experience after a tragedy where large numbers of people are killed, or when we hear of a murder of a child. This book will show that our personal childhood griefs, where they are recognized by us, prepare us for our inevitable adult losses, like the loss of our parents. In other words, we do not have to come to our first adult grief completely unprepared. It is obvious that the range of grief, its intensity and duration vary according to one's personality. Some people, for instance, have very passionate griefs. Others have gentler ones. The basic conundrum to emerge from research is that there is no laid down order for grieving. It used to be considered that there were set stages whereby people went through disbelief, then denial, then guilt and anger, and finally acceptance and resolution. This is not thought to be the case anymore. The people have begun to realize this. Bereavement counselors and psychotherapists say how valuable it would be for people to know this. For while grief has recognizable stages, even including one called hunting, which is where some people search in crowds of shoppers and in cinemas for the face of a loved one who has died, these are also very individual. It is important for us to know that the way we accept or experience grief has much in common with others, but also says a great deal about ourselves and our relationships. Following on from this, there are the habits of and customs of grieving. The question of whether or not we view the body of someone who has died perplexed many of the people interviewed. Some felt cheated because they had not done so, some traumatized because they had. They very much wanted to know what others who had suffered bereavement had to say about this, for they felt isolated and ill-informed when making a decision of this kind. Others were alienated by cliches, comments like, "Time will heal," and "You're young, you'll get over it," added insult to injury in their eyes. What those of us who are not suffering grief, do to those who are, is another important strand in this book. We have tendencies which we barely recognize, among them a tendency to take over people who are grieving. When putting an arm around someone to comfort them, we sometimes go further than that and try to control them. Something I called infantilizing. We seem to do this most often when adults cry, as if an adult in tears breaks a number of conventions. There is, I think, a strong argument for necessary tears and our acceptance of them, but they bring up questions about the boundaries of grief. What are the boundaries between public and private emotions? What are the boundaries in ourselves between our capable adult personae and the hurt, wounded feelings which grief evokes in us? making some of us feel frighteningly like children again. Implicit within these pages are questions and answers about loss of all kinds, especially those that are not usually written about. In talking about important losses, about grief, and about recovering from grief, many people I interviewed expressed a wish that grief be allowed out of the closet and be treated honestly. They were tired of it being taboo. People were especially tired of the prejudice that grief takes up time, which would be better spent on other things. Many people said that coming to terms with or recovering from a loss took more time than they ever imagined. They also described how grief is a guardian of a certain amount of time we otherwise spend extremely badly. It presents us with important opportunities for learning. In accumulating the material for a book of this kind, it has been necessary to interview a number of people across a wide range of experience. In acknowledging my debt to all the people who agreed to see me, I would like to say a little about how people were found and how interviews were conducted. To begin with the latter, people were guaranteed anonymity. This was to protect individuals at a time when many were vulnerable, and also to protect family or friends. The same was true for professionals. Bereavement counselors or psychotherapists are not named so that the identity of the individuals who use their services is also safeguarded. In the course of research, I interviewed between 120 and 130 people in different parts of Britain. Professionals were approached through their various organizations, and individuals were found in a variety of ways. Some through bodies like schools, college, and workplaces, some through self-help groups, and some by word of mouth. I am especially indebted to people who, once they have been interviewed, took upon themselves the responsibility of phoning other people they knew to suggest they contact me. While the bulk of this book is concerned with people's individual losses, a part of it involves looking at grief's causes in a broader context, which is where I believe they belong. There is, in any case, an exploration of different causes of loss. The difference, for example, between feelings which attend the loss of a loved one through a parting like divorce and those which follow a death. Finally, I have been led by the research for this book to think of loss and grief as having profoundly creative aspect, so that many, though not all of us, become bigger rather than smaller people as a result. One woman in her 30s says she has benefited from the death of a close childhood friend. Sometimes I have such a sharp sense of gratitude for being alive. It almost cuts me, as if life itself is sharp. I have this searing sense of aliveness, of being awake rather than dead. This book is essentially an affirmation, especially in a busy world, of the potential value of individual grief. It is also a portrait of what we share, of what we have in common,